wasn't all perfect. Before we could get to what you just saw, we had to go through this with this car. As you can see, there were a little bit of growing pains, and that's what this video is going to be about. So let's rewind back to before it ever started and walk you through step by step everything we had to get through in order to get this thing on the road and running right. All right, so we're about ready to start this thing. Got the battery hooked up, got enough coolant in it so that it should be okay. To be extra safe here, I got about a quarter tank of what I think is low octane, which here in Utah is about 85. I'm gonna mix a whole thing of this with roughly another 5 gallons and pour that combination in there. This should get us well over 93, just to be extra safe. We don't want anything, if the timing's out of whack or it's way too lean right now, we don't want any of those issues getting us on this first startup, which, it's not gonna be under load or anything, but just to be extra safe, we're gonna go ahead and mix that in. Started for the first time, and it didn't go perfectly. It didn't go terribly. It didn't go perfectly. I think there was a couple things going on that contributed to that. And basically where it's at right now is I'm pretty sure the plugs are fouled. I'm seeing a little bit of smoke, a little bit of what appears to be oil, burning some oil, and I really want to get to the bottom of that. So we're going to take some precautions here. I'm going to talk to you about what I am going to do in hopes that I can rectify sort of kind of situation that we got going on right now. Hopefully this is an easy fix and this is not a sign of some more major engine damage, but we got to start with the basic stuff first. So let me turn the camera around and tell you what we're about to do. So when I first started this thing, this is an Edelbrock Carburetor. This is the Edelbrock ABS2. This uses metering rods, step-up springs. Really all you need to know here is these metering rods, there's an orifice, which is your jet, and there's the rod that goes down into your primary jets. Now, when these are down, you can imagine you've got a hole with something going through it, and there's kind of like a donut shape of fuel to flow through. So that would be like a lean setting, right? And then when you get on the gas, these pop up and more fuel goes through. But I think what happened was I had the wrong springs in here that were matched up to when I had the stock cam and I made more vacuum and all that stuff. I think I was dumping way too much fuel at idle when I first started this thing up. And it's very possible that I contaminated the oil with fuel by running too rich. So to be safe, we're gonna go ahead and we are going to change the oil and the filter. And then if there was anything that was in there, debris, whatever, hopefully we can get that out now. So we are gonna do that. The other thing I noticed is that my fuel filter, if you look here kind of in the bottom, it's hard to see, but there is some debris in there. So about time we'll go ahead and replace that just to be safe. So I've got two different styles of fuel filter and we will pick the right one and take the other one back. I did mention that the plugs look to be a bit fouled. And so I got some new plugs here, some fresh plugs I'm gonna put in. We are gonna figure out what the jetting is currently so that we can adjust the jetting based on the air-fuel ratio. So I got my kit right here. Now, let's talk about that oil smoke we were seeing. Well, I'm not really sure what it is, but I do know I have new valve covers now. They're a little bit taller. I have the same old PCV, and PCVs are super cheap. So we are gonna swap in a new PCV valve, and we are also going to install an oil catch can. Now, if you're not familiar with how these work, you just mount these somewhere in the engine bay. You've got an inlet and an outlet. And basically this just gives like a very small reservoir if we're getting oil blow by, instead of getting sucked up out of the valve covers and into the intake, into the cylinders, it will wind up in the catch can. It's got like a little dipstick you can check with. So we're gonna go ahead and install that somewhere. And I'm hoping that by doing all of these things, this little kind of like tune-up after the tune-up of, you know, installing all these new parts, that will be off to a better kind of start, and then we can start from there in tuning. There's no really point right now in going out and driving the thing with the tune this far off. I mean, it runs and drives, but the plugs are kind of fouled, and I don't know. I just don't want to do any damage to this motor after I just got it together. So we're gonna basically do some basic maintenance here, and then go drive the thing and go from there. Well, I'm not loving the way the oil looks. To me, that looks sparkly. I don't want to drop my phone in there, but I don't know. I don't love it. But this is a new cam. You know, we did put in, you got a lot of new surfaces mating. So it is possible that maybe some of that is, you know, just from those surfaces mating here, and it's good that we're changing the oil. I really don't know. I don't love the way it looks. But it kind of is what it is at this point. We'll change it and we'll go from there. So obviously I had all this, you know, assembly lube in there when I was doing it, and I do wonder if any of that is to blame for some of the sparkles and sort of that darker color. I'm really not sure, but at this point, again, all we can really do is throw some new oil in it and go again and see. I mean, obviously, in addition to just doing the cam, we did have to clearance the pistons, which you all saw how that went. So we'll just have to see. Go ahead and put a fresh filter in it, 5 quarts, and keep going. Okay, this time around, we went with a little bit hotter plug. These are from E3. I've had kind of good luck with these before. They save you from needing to gap them at all. They're gapped, I will say they're gapped relatively tight from the factory, but you can't gap these, which saves you a little bit of time. And they're supposed to provide a better burn. I don't know how much of that's a gimmick or not, but they're relatively inexpensive, and I could get them pretty quickly. I've had good luck with them before. So on this specific setup, it's a 3/4 inch reach, I think a 14 millimeter, and I went with a 5/8 head to get in there for my socket. So we'll go ahead and throw these on after we put some fresh oil in it, and see how we do here. All right, got the catch can in. I know the lines are crossed, but it's just kind of the way it is. That's the in, that's the out. Probably at some point I'll take a look and see if it matters, if I can switch them just so they're not crisscrossed. We got the new fuel filter, new plugs are in. Had a little leak over here on the fuel line. Oh, that reminds me, I gotta tighten up that valve cover. And we'll give it a start here in a second. I may have had it too full of fuel. I just checked the dipstick with 5 quarts, and that looks a lot better. So yeah, we'll fire it up here in a second. Let me just make sure these valve covers are tight. At this point, I was kind of scratching my head because we had a number of issues. We had solved some, but basically what we had at this point was a weird miss that I was noticing. It seemed ignition related to me. Also, I was noticing a little bit of smoke. So I'm gonna flip the camera around and show you kind of everything I went through, my thought process, and then how we wind up eventually solving both problems. So I pulled the distributor cap because I did know that the wires that were on it before were from 91. And this was the cap that was on it that didn't look like it was in bad shape. You can't see it here. I'll show you a picture. Basically, the little button on the underside of the cap seemed very burnt to me. So that looked bad. I used a multimeter. I checked the coil. The coil checked out more or less okay, but I noticed that burnt button. So I got myself a new cap, and this is the part number that I grabbed. This was just available at a local auto parts store. Installed that. I really thought it was gonna fix my miss issue, but it didn't. Around that time, I was getting a lot of flack from using these E3 spark plugs, and I pulled some of them out, and some of them, like this one, looked, you know, pretty much fine, right? But I found one that looked like we weren't getting a lot of firing. And then when I looked closer, it's gonna be really hard for you to see. Oh, there, you can see it. There was a crack in the porcelain. This plug wasn't firing, or at least it was partially firing at idle, but under load, it seemed to not be. So I think I was running on 7 to 8 cylinders. Went ahead and yanked all of these E3s out. And I had mentioned I did have luck with these previously, but I was just not having any luck with these on this vehicle. So I put in a set of auto lights, and I'll mark down the number that I installed. I don't know if I have the box laying around here on my table still, but basically I threw those auto lights in, and all of a sudden, all of the mist went away. So as you can see on here, I've got a new cap and rotor. I know the colors, I couldn't find a blue one, so I had to go with red, and they don't give you a cover when you get your new cap and rotor. So new cap and rotor, new plugs, that solved the ignition issue, but it was still smoking. And why was it smoking? Okay, this is a really good little tech tip here if you've got a new set of valve covers. These are the valve covers that came off of the vehicle before, okay? Now what you'll notice here is there's no baffle plate where my finger is coming through. There's nothing to stop oil from getting shot, basically, you know, out of the push rods off the top of the rocker arms and going out the breathers. Now, with your stock rocker arms, they sit much lower. And I think what was happening was it wasn't really an issue with my stock rocker arms for whatever reason, but with these new roller rockers and these new, you know, trip flow push rods, and maybe just the height of the valve cover or where I drilled the holes, because remember, these ones didn't have holes drilled for my PCV and my oil fill. So I installed them without the baffle plates, and I'll show you a little picture of the baffle plates. But what was happening was the oil was coming out, and basically it was going straight in. It was like bombarding the PCV with oil. It wasn't because I had a bunch of blow by. That was my initial concern, was my rings were shot and I had a bunch of blow by. But it wasn't that. It was basically oil was coming off of there and just going straight into the PCV, and it was pulling vacuum at idle, and it was just sucking it out and going straight into the catch can. My catch can was full. I'll show you a picture of that. And it was just blowing out the breather. Once I went and installed those baffle plates on both sides, totally fixed that issue. And you may ask yourself, well, why did I not want to install them? Well, anytime you get an aftermarket set of valve covers, those little baffle plates, they're held in by like these small screws, and I've always worried that like the screws could come loose somehow and like fall in your motor. So that's always been a concern for me. But the big takeaway here is like follow the instructions, install those baffle plates. You really need them. Once I did that, it totally stopped the issue. I mean, I might get a tiny little bit of oil out the breather if I'm really on it, but really, issue is more or less solved. So at this point, engine's running good. I got to tune the carburetor a little bit. I did play with the jetting. I can show you a little time lapse there. You know, played with the jetting, got it pretty close. The next two big things I'm going to do, really before I get on the dyno, are we're going to throw an X pipe on it. We're going to set a proper set of mufflers, 2.5-inch piping. So all 2.5-inch now, none of this 2-inch crap. All 2.5-inch, which would be great for, it's oversized really for this motor. And then we're going to ditch the mechanical fan for an electric fan, because I did learn that Engine Masters basically found that style mechanical fan that I have here, let me show you. This style mechanical fan with no clutch and no shroud. Now this is they're kind of the flimsy blades, but basically this could rob, I would say, maybe 20 wheel horsepower. So I've got myself a Be Cool fan. The problem with these Comets and probably Falcons is that there's not any room to install an electric fan with the water pump set up like this behind the radiator for like a puller. So you need a pusher type fan. So for like 80 bucks, I got a pusher type fan that's gonna go in here. Way back when I did an American Auto Wire harness, so I've already got a nice harness, and in here I've got a trigger wire for it. I did get it was all for my birthday. I did get a wiring harness that's gonna go in here, so we'll have an electric fan. It'll be triggered by a coolant temp switch and should free up some horsepower plus that exhaust. At that point, we'll drive it around like, a little bit more, make sure the jetting is pretty close, and then it's gonna be off to the dyno to see how much power this thing makes, and I am excited. And remember, this was our very, very lofty goal of 335 wheel horsepower, but that's back when it weighed 2940. I think it's gonna weigh less than that. We were starting at 167 rear wheel horsepower. So I think we're gonna make a lot more than 167. I don't know if we're gonna get here, but we're gonna have a new dyno graph for you. That's probably gonna be in a couple videos. But that is gonna wrap up this video. Hope you liked it, hope you learned some stuff, and we'll wrap this video up listening to that sweet 302 sound.